My name is Whitney Caldwell. I'm 34 years old, and I want to tell you about the night I sat at my kitchen table, holding my phone, watching my sister's name light up the screen for the third time in 20 minutes, calling me from Lisbon, Portugal, where she was stranded with no passport, no return tickets, and no way home. And I want to tell you what I did, but first I need to tell you how we got there, because the ending only makes sense if you understand the beginning. And the beginning is not the phone call. The beginning is a car backing out of a driveway without me in it. Before I go any further, if you're already leaning in, if something about this title made you stop scrolling because you know exactly what it feels like to be the person who gets left behind and then called when things fall apart, I want you to hit that like button right now, subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I genuinely want to know. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, in a house that looked, from the outside, like the kind of place where nothing could go wrong. Colonial-style, tree-lined street, the kind of front porch that makes people slow down when they drive past. My dad was a civil engineer. My mom, Lorraine, ran an interior design boutique that she poured herself into the way some people pour themselves into prayer. We were comfortable, we were presentable. We were, by every external measure, a family. There were 3 of us kids, Renata the oldest, me, then Cord the youngest, who learned early that being charming was more efficient than being responsible, and who used that lesson without apology his entire life. And here's what you need to understand about how our family worked. Renata was the golden one. She was the template. The first child, the one my parents shaped their entire identity around. When Renata succeeded, my parents beamed. When Renata struggled, my parents mobilized. She was loved loudly, visibly, in the way that leaves a mark you can feel years later. Cord was the cherished one, the baby. Nobody expected much from him, which meant nobody was ever disappointed, which meant everyone was always delighted. And me? I was the capable one. If you've ever been called capable by people who were supposed to call you loved, you already know everything I'm about to say. Capable is what families say about the child they've decided can take care of herself. Capable is the word they use so they don't have to use the word neglected. I was capable, and I was competent, and I handled things, and nobody worried about me. And I spent the first 30 years of my life believing that was a compliment. The defining moment, the one I carry with me the way some people carry a scar, happened when I was 11. We were supposed to take a family trip to the Outer Banks. I had been looking forward to it for 6 weeks. I had a list of things I wanted to do there. I had written it in a green spiral notebook. 3 days before we left, our dog Beaumont got sick. He was old and frail, and the vet said he couldn't be boarded. Someone needed to stay home with him. My dad looked at me and said, "Whitney's the only one responsible enough to handle it." And everyone nodded, like it was settled, like it was even a compliment. I watched them pack the car from my bedroom window. I remember the sound of the trunk closing. I remember my mother waving up at me, a little wave, like she was leaving for the grocery store, not for a week at the beach without me. I remember pressing my hand flat against the glass. Beaumont died on the 2nd day. I sat on the kitchen floor with him, and I didn't tell anyone until they came home. Because even at 11, I already understood that my grief was not the kind of thing this family had space for. That was the first time I understood that being the responsible one was a role assigned to me, not earned by me. And here's the thing about roles assigned to you in childhood. They follow you. They follow you into your 20s, into your jobs, into your relationships, into every room where someone needs something and looks around for the person who will handle it without making a fuss. I became that person, reflexively, automatically, like breathing. If you have ever been that person, the one everyone turns to in a crisis but somehow forgets to invite to the good things, I think you know exactly why this story is going to go the way it goes. And I need you to keep watching because it matters how it ends. I paid my own way through the University of Georgia, partial academic scholarship, 25 hours a week at a copy and print shop, and a very specific relationship with the phrase, "I'll figure it out." I majored in international business with a minor in Spanish. I graduated with honors. My family came to the ceremony and stayed for 40 minutes before leaving early for Renata's brunch. Renata had not graduated. There was no particular occasion, it was just a brunch. I stood in my cap and gown and a photograph taken by a classmate because nobody from my family was there to take it, and I smiled the way you smile when you have decided that you are fine. After graduation, I built a life with my own hands. I moved to Charleston, South Carolina. I got a job at Hargrove Maritime Solutions as an international logistics coordinator, which sounds bureaucratic, but what it actually means is that I manage the movement of freight shipments between the US, Portugal, and Brazil. I speak conversational Portuguese. I know customs compliance the way some people know their favorite song, bone deep, automatic, capable of performing it under pressure. My manager Doug once told me, in front of the entire team, that I was the person the company would fall apart without. I accepted the compliment graciously. And then I drove home and made tea and thought about all the times the people who were supposed to say something like that said nothing at all. The person who showed up when my family didn't was Deja Fontenot. We met in college during a study group for an economics class, and she was the first person who ever called me out, gently, specifically, and without flinching, on my habit of making myself small so other people could be comfortable. She called it shrinking as a survival strategy. I did not appreciate it at the time. I appreciated it enormously later. Deja is 36, she lives 20 minutes from my apartment, and she is the kind of friend who notices when you are performing fine. Not because she is looking for problems, because she is actually looking at you, which is rarer than it sounds. The night my family flew to Lisbon without telling me, Deja brought wine and pasta ingredients and sat cross-legged on my couch and asked me to tell her exactly what happened. Not to be dramatic about it, just because she wanted to know. I had found out about the trip 6 days earlier, not from a conversation, not from an invitation that got lost, or a miscommunication, or any of the explanations I briefly, reflexively tried to build in my head the way you build a shelter out of whatever's nearby. I found out from my mother's Instagram story, a flat lay of 4 boarding passes, a Portuguese phrase book, a tube of SPF 50. The caption, "Lisbon, baby. Family adventure time." 4 boarding passes. I counted them standing in the parking garage at Hargrove Maritime, my free hand pressing flat against the concrete wall. 4. My mother, my father, my sister, my brother. A trip to Portugal, the country I work with every single day of my professional life, the country whose customs officers know my name, the country whose language I studied, and nobody had called me. Not to invite me, not to tell me, not to say, "We're doing this thing without you, just so you know." Nothing. I didn't call, I didn't text. I got in my car and I drove home and I called Deja. And that Friday, while my family was somewhere over the Atlantic, Deja and I sat in my kitchen and she looked at me with those dark eyes of hers that make people say things they didn't plan to say. And she said, "Whitney, they left you on purpose." "I know," I said. "Do you actually know? Because you have that face. The one where you've already decided to be fine." I looked at her. I did have that face. I have had that face since I was 11 years old, watching a car back out of a driveway. "What do you want me to do?" I said. "They're already gone." "I don't want you to do anything," she said. "I just want you to feel what this actually is." I poured myself more wine. I looked at my phone. I set it face down on the coffee table. I did not know yet that in 4 days, that phone would become the most important object in this entire story. The first 3 days, I didn't hear from any of them. Not a text, not a photo, nothing. And I want to be honest with you about what that silence felt like, because I think people assume that when you've already accepted something painful, the silence that follows is neutral. Like quiet is the absence of hurt. But it isn't. Silence after that kind of exclusion is its own full thing. It has weight. It sits in the room with you. It follows you into the kitchen at 7 in the morning when you're making coffee, and you catch yourself wondering if they're having breakfast together somewhere in the Alfama, laughing about something, and whether your name comes up at all. And if it does, whether anyone goes quiet. I went to work. I filed my customs documentation for a shipment moving through Lisbon, and yes, I am aware of the particular irony of that. I answered 43 emails. I had a call with the vendor in Porto who mispronounced my name, and I corrected him politely and moved on. I was functional. I was professional. I was, by every external measure, completely fine. Saturday I went to the farmer's market alone, which I actually love doing alone, and I bought a bunch of ranunculus in a color somewhere between peach and rust, and I put them in the wide-mouthed jar I keep on my kitchen windowsill. Sunday I saw a movie I'd wanted to see for 2 months. I slept without setting an alarm for the first time in longer than I could remember, and I woke up in the particular stillness of a Sunday morning, and I lay there and I thought, I could keep doing this. I could just keep doing this quietly, and nobody would even notice I'd made a choice. That was the part that scared me most, not the anger. I could work with anger. It was the possibility that I could simply disappear from this family's story, and the shape of their days would not change at all. Monday, Cord texted me a photo. No message, just a photo. It was pastéis de nata, those small Portuguese custard tarts, golden and slightly caramelized on top, in a paper sleeve from what I recognized immediately as a cafe in the Alfama district. I know this because I have sent that exact cafe's address to 3 different colleagues over the years as a recommendation. I stared at the photo for a long time. Then I typed, "Looks amazing," and I sent it. And I hated myself briefly, the way you hate yourself when you extend grace to someone who hasn't asked for it yet, because you've been trained your entire life to make people comfortable at your own expense. And then I forgave myself, because what else do you say? He wrote back 20 minutes later, "I wish you were here." I read it 3 times. I didn't respond. And I want to ask you something, because I've been thinking about this ever since. What do you do when someone says the right thing at the wrong time? When the apology is in the right shape, but it's sitting inside the wrong container? Cord knew what happened was wrong. I know he knew. He knew it the moment the car left without me. I'd bet money on that. But knowing something is wrong and doing something about it are 2 completely different moral acts. And he had chosen the first one without the second for his entire life. I wonder if you've ever been on the receiving end of that. Someone who sees clearly but stays quiet. Someone who knows and doesn't move. Drop that in the comments, because I think it's one of the most specific kinds of loneliness there is, and I don't think people talk about it enough. Tell me if you've been there. I read every single one. Tuesday night is when everything shifted. I found out the details later, pieced together from Cord's account and one very telling voicemail my mother left me that she clearly didn't mean to be as honest as it was. Here's what happened. Renata had decided weeks before the trip that travel insurance was an unnecessary expense. This was not a financial decision. Brock makes more money than most people see in a decade. It was an aesthetic one. Renata finds the concept of preparing for things to go wrong vaguely pessimistic, and she has spent her entire life in circumstances comfortable enough that this worldview has never seriously cost her anything. Until Tuesday night in the Bairro Alto. They were at an outdoor restaurant, one of those beautiful Lisbon evenings where the light goes golden and then pink, and the tiles on the buildings catch it, and everything looks like it was designed to be photographed. Renata had her bag on the back of her chair. I don't know if she looked away for 30 seconds or 5 minutes. What I know is that when she reached for it, it was gone. In the bag, her passport, Brock's credit card, the one they were using as the primary card for the trip, both of their return flight tickets, printed because Renata does not trust digital boarding passes, a detail I find both completely on brand and almost cosmically poetic given what came next, and approximately 340 euros in cash. They spent 4 hours at the police station filing a report. Renata's children, 7 and 9 years old, and I want to be clear that none of this was their fault. None of it. were overtired and confused, and Cord sat in a plastic chair in a waiting room that smelled like industrial cleaner and felt, by his own later admission, the specific discomfort of a person who has been coasting on other people's competence for so long that he has forgotten what it feels like to be genuinely needed and genuinely useless at the same time. By midnight Lisbon time, 7 in the evening in Charleston, Renata had called the U.S. Embassy and learned that an emergency passport replacement would take 3 to 5 business days. She had discovered that rebooking their return flights without the original tickets would cost $800 per person. She had run every option she could think of through her head and come up empty. And then she did the thing she has always done when she runs out of options. She called me. My phone buzzed at 7:23 p.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table. I had just made tea, loose leaf, measured into the strainer, 4-minute timer, dishes washed while I waited. The ritual is the point. It tells my body that there is a sequence, and sequences end. I looked at her name on the screen. I set the phone back down. It buzzed again at 7:31. At 7:44, it was my mother. And I want to stop here for just a second, because this is the moment the whole story turns on, and I need you to understand what it felt like to see my mother's name on that screen at night. I have done a lot of work, therapy, time, the slow and unglamorous process of understanding your own patterns, and I can tell you that I know, intellectually, exactly what my family has done and what it costs me. I know it clearly. But intellectual knowledge and the feeling of your mother calling you in the dark are two entirely different things. They live in different parts of your body. And the part of my body that responded to that call had nothing to do with clarity. It had everything to do with 11 years old and a car backing out of a driveway. I picked it up. Whitney. Her voice was thin and careful and slightly too controlled, the way Lorraine Caldwell sounds when she is embarrassed about something she cannot directly name. I need to ask you something, and I need you to not be upset. I didn't say anything. Renata's in a situation. We all are. And we were thinking, because you work with Lisbon, you know people there, you know how things work. If you could maybe make some calls? I held the phone. I looked at the ranunculus in the jar on my windowsill, the peach and rust of them in the kitchen light. Mom, I said slowly, I want to ask you something first. Okay. When did you book the flights? Silence. 6 weeks ago, she said. And in those 6 weeks, did you think about calling me? The silence that followed was longer, the kind of silence that is its own full answer, that doesn't need anything added to it. We thought you'd be busy with work, she said. I felt something move through me that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't anger exactly, it was more like recognition, the feeling of finally seeing the shape of something you've been bumping into in the dark your whole life. Mom, I said, I work with Lisbon. You just said it. I manage freight shipments through Lisbon. I speak Portuguese. I know the consular staff at the American Embassy by name. I paused. I kept my voice very even. But you thought I'd be too busy. Whitney. I'm going to call you back, I said, and I hung up. I sat at that kitchen table with my tea and the ranunculus and the quiet of my apartment, and I did not move for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I was watching the second hand on my grandmother's watch, the cream-faced one I wear every day, the one she left me because she was the only person in my family who ever looked at me like I was more than useful. I watched that hand move and I breathed, and I thought about what I was actually being asked to do. They had left me behind. They had not called to invite me, not called to explain, not called to check if I was all right with being excluded from a trip to a country I work with every day of my professional life. And now, from 3,000 miles away, with no passport and no tickets home, my sister's name was lighting up my phone. I called Deja. They need help, I said when she picked up. I know, she said. I saw your mom call. What are you going to do? I looked at the wall. I looked at my hands. Long-fingered, unmanicured, the hands of someone who files paperwork and fixes things, and writes long emails that solve problems other people created. I don't know yet, I said, and that's the first time I've said that in my entire life and actually meant it. Deja was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Good, stay there for a minute." Cord called at 8:17. I answered. His voice was different. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't careful. It sounded like a 31-year-old man who was ashamed of himself in a way that was new and clarifying and slightly too late. "Whitney," he said, "I'm sorry, not about this, about all of it. I knew and I didn't say anything, and I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. "I know," I said. "Are you going to help us?" I looked at the ranunculus. I thought about Beaumont dying on a kitchen floor while a family I loved was at the beach. I thought about a graduation photo taken by a classmate. I thought about 43 emails and a shipment moving through Lisbon and a cream-faced watch that belonged to the only person who saw me clearly. "I don't know yet," I said again, and this time it felt like a complete sentence. I made a list. This is what I do when the emotion gets too large for my chest and I need somewhere to put it. Not a feelings journal, not a pros and cons column, just a clean list of facts as I know them. Verifiable things. Solid ground. I got a yellow legal pad from the drawer beside the refrigerator, and I sat back down at the kitchen table, and I wrote in the specific, deliberate shorthand I use at work when I'm untangling a logistics problem that has too many moving parts. The list. Renata's passport is gone. Emergency processing at the U.S. Embassy, Lisbon. 3 to 5 business days, standard timeline. I know Marcus Frere. Consul Officer Assistant, U.S. Embassy, Lisbon. We worked together for 3 months last year on a documentation dispute involving a misdeclared freight manifest. I have his direct number saved in my phone under M, between my dentist and my dry cleaner, because that is how my professional life is organized. My contact at TAP Air Portugal's cargo division is Ana Rocha. Anna's brother Eduardo is a supervisor in TAP's passenger services. I have never called Eduardo directly. I have his number because Anna gave it to me 18 months ago and said, in case you ever need it. I have never needed it until tonight. The children on this trip are 7 and 9 years old. They did not choose any of this. Renata did not invite me. My mother did not call until she needed something. Cord said he was sorry. I have been here before. Not in this kitchen, not with this phone, not with Portugal on the other end, but in this position. The one where I am asked to fix the damage that my own exclusion helped create. The one where being capable becomes the reason you get called and the reason you weren't invited in the same breath. I looked at that list for a long time. Long enough for my tea to go completely cold. Long enough for the ranunculus on the windowsill to go from peach to a deeper amber in the kitchen light. Long enough to understand something I had been circling for years without quite landing on it. The question was never whether I could help. I could help in my sleep. I could make 2 phone calls and have this entire situation materially improved within 48 hours. The question, the real one, the one that had been sitting underneath every other question my entire life, was who I was going to be when I helped. Was I going to be the 11-year-old pressing her hand against the glass, doing what she was told because being needed was the closest thing to being loved that she knew? Or was I going to be someone else, someone who chose, consciously, with full information, based on her own values? I picked up my phone. I called Marcus Frere. He answered on the 3rd ring, which given the time difference meant it was past 1 a.m. in Lisbon, and I started to apologize, and he said, "Whitney, stop. What do you need?" And that, right there, is what professional trust looks like when it's been built carefully over time. I explained the situation in precise, unhurried sentences. Passport stolen in the Bairro Alto, police report filed, 2 minors involved, emergency replacement needed. He asked me 3 questions. I answered all 3. He said he would flag the file first thing in the morning and make sure it moved to the expedited queue. Then I called Eduardo Rocha. He did not know me personally, but he knew Ana, and when I said his sister's name, his voice warmed immediately, and he listened while I explained what I needed. Standby list access, rebooking review, account of the stolen ticket documentation. He said he would contact the family directly in the morning with options. 12 minutes total, 2 calls. I set the phone down. And then I did something that surprised me. Not the calls, those were straightforward, those were just competence. But what I did after. I did not call Renata back. I did not call my mother. I opened my text thread with Cord and I typed, Marcus Freire at the embassy will call Renata tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Lisbon time. Eduardo Rocha at TAP will contact you directly about rebooking options. You're going to be okay. He responded in under a minute. How did you do that? I typed, I work with Lisbon. I put the phone face down on the table. I sat in my kitchen in the quiet, and I understood something that I want to try to say carefully, because I think it matters, and I don't want to get it wrong. I did not help them because they deserved it. I helped them because of who I want to be, and those are 2 entirely different reasons, and only one of them belongs to me. The children were 7 and 9. Cord had said he was sorry, and the woman I am building, the one coming out the other side of the therapy and the work and the 2 years of slowly, unglamorously learning to stop shrinking herself into whatever shape the room needed. That woman does not let innocent people suffer to prove a point. Not because she is a pushover, because she has decided, specifically and deliberately, that her compassion is hers. It does not belong to the people who hurt her. It belongs to her. And she gets to choose where it goes. If that distinction hit you somewhere specific, if you know exactly what I mean by the difference between helping because you're trained to and helping because you chose to, hit that like button right now, subscribe if you haven't. Because what happens next is the part that changed something in me permanently, and I don't want you to miss it. In the morning, my mother called. I let it ring twice, then I answered. I don't know what you did, she said. But someone from the embassy called Renata this morning and, Mom? My voice was quiet, not cold, quiet. There is a difference, and it took me a long time to learn it. I need you to hear something. She went still on the other end of the line. I could feel her going still the way you can feel weather changing. I helped because of the kids, I said, and because Cord apologized. And because I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to become someone who lets people drown to prove a point. That's who I am. I paused. But I am not available to be this family's emergency contact and nothing else. I'm not going to keep being left behind every time things are good and called every time things go wrong. That's not going to keep working. Silence. I know, my mother said, and then, in a voice I had genuinely never heard from her before, smaller than her usual voice, stripped of its careful management, just her, just Lorraine, 63 years old and sitting somewhere in Lisbon realizing something she should have realized 30 years ago. She said, I know it isn't. I held the phone. I looked at my grandmother's watch. I need you to mean that, I said. I do, she said. I think I've known it for a long time. We didn't hug through a phone. We didn't resolve 30 years in 11 minutes. But something shifted. I felt it, small and real and permanent. The way the first crack in a wall changes the structure of the whole thing without anyone being able to see it from the outside yet. I want to tell you something about that moment because it is the moment in this entire story that I keep coming back to. The one that sits in my chest differently from all the others. It wasn't the phone calls to the embassy. It wasn't the rebooking. It wasn't the fact that I had, in 12 minutes, done what my family couldn't do in 4 hours, though I won't pretend that didn't mean something. It was my mother's voice going small. It was hearing, for the first time in my life, that she knew. She already knew. And she had chosen, consistently, for 30 years, not to act on that knowledge. That is the most painful kind of person to love. Not the one who hurts you without knowing, the one who knows and doesn't move. And I have spent the better part of my adult life trying to understand how you hold both things at once, the love and the damage, the knowledge that someone can see you clearly and still choose the comfortable thing, still choose the path of least resistance, still let the car back out of the driveway without you in it. I don't have a clean answer. I'm not sure one exists. What I have is this. I am 34 years old. I have built a life with my own hands in my own city on my own terms. I have a job that values my competence in all the ways my family forgot to. I have a friend who looks at me when I am performing fine and says so out loud. I have a cream-faced watch that belonged to the only person who loved me without an agenda. And I have, for the first time in my adult life, a clear and specific understanding of who I am when I am under pressure. I am the person who makes the calls, not because I have to, because I decided to. And I am also the person who, after making those calls, puts the phone face down, makes tea, washes the dishes, and does not wait for a thank you. The family lands back in Charleston 5 days later. Renata texts me 2 words, "Thank you." I read it standing in my kitchen, still in the ivory blouse and the sage green trousers I've had on since morning, my hair coming loose from the bun at my temple. I read it 3 times. I set the phone down, I fill the kettle, I measure the tea, I set the timer. I look at the ranunculus in the jar on the windowsill, still holding, still that particular shade of peach and rust in the afternoon light. I do not respond to Renata. Not yet. Maybe not for a while. Because there is something I need to do first. I need to book a flight. I opened my laptop at the kitchen table that same evening. Not dramatically, not with a grand sense of occasion. I just opened it the way you open something you have been meaning to open for a long time and kept finding reasons to put off. Quietly, practically, with the specific calm of a person who has finally stopped waiting for permission. I went to the TAP Air Portugal website. I put in the dates, 6 nights in September. Charleston to Lisbon, direct connection through JFK. I selected my seat, window, left side of the plane, because I had read once that on eastbound transatlantic flights, the sunrise comes up on the left and I wanted to see it. I entered my card details. I confirmed the booking. The confirmation email arrived in my inbox at 9:47 p.m. with a subject line that said, "Your trip to Lisbon is confirmed." I read that subject line 4 times. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of my apartment and felt something I want to try to describe accurately because I think it matters. It was not triumph. It was not relief exactly. It was more like a door closing softly behind you in a house you have decided to leave. Not a slam, not a statement, just the quiet click of a latch finding its place. I had been saving for this trip for 2 years. Not for Portugal specifically, for the idea of going somewhere entirely for myself. No logistics, no freight manifests, no one else's timeline. Just me and a city I had been professionally intimate with for years and had never once stood inside of in person. I had always found a reason to wait. The savings weren't quite enough. Work was busy. The timing wasn't right. And underneath all of those reasons, if I am being honest with myself in the way that therapy has made uncomfortably possible, was a quieter reason. I did not feel, for a long time, that I was the kind of person who deserved to take up that much space in her own life. I feel that differently now. In the weeks that followed the trip, I learned things secondhand, the way you always learn things in families like mine, through the person who still calls, through the gaps in what isn't said as much as what is. Cord called me on a Wednesday afternoon. I was eating lunch at my desk, a container of leftover pasta I'd made Sunday, and he called and I answered because his voice on Monday night in Lisbon had sounded like someone telling the truth for the first time in a long time, and I decided that deserved something. "I want to tell you something," he said, "and I don't want you to respond. I just want you to hear it." "Okay," I said. "I've been thinking about the money, the $14,000. from when I was 22. I set my fork down. You didn't tell anyone, he said. You gave it to me, and you didn't tell anyone, and you never once made me feel like I owed you anything beyond paying it back. And I did pay it back, but I never... He stopped. I never said thank you, not really. And I never said that I saw what you were doing for this family all that time, and I just let you do it, and I thought, I don't know, I thought that was just who you were. Like it was a feature of you, not a cost. I sat with that for a long moment. It was a cost, I said. I know, he said. I'm sorry. And this is the thing about genuine apologies. The real ones, not the two-word text, not the careful ones that are really about managing your own discomfort. They land in a completely different place in your body. They don't fix anything, but they land differently. They feel like being seen rather than being managed. I know you are, I said. And Cord, I need you to do something with that. Not for me, just don't keep being the person who sees and doesn't move. You're better than that. I've always thought so, even when you made it hard. He was quiet for a while. I'm going to try, he said. That's enough, I said. That's actually enough. Renata did not call. I want to be honest about what that felt like, because I think there's a version of this story where I tell you it didn't matter, where I wrap it in the language of acceptance and moving on, and that version would be cleaner, but it would not be true. It mattered. It still matters in the specific, dull way that things matter when you have finally stopped hoping they will be different, and you are just sitting with the shape of what they actually are. Renata sent the two-word text, and that was the whole of it. No call, no conversation, no acknowledgement of the 6 weeks she had to pick up the phone and didn't. I am not sure she is capable of that conversation. I am not sure she has ever been in a situation that required her to examine herself at that depth, and I think she has organized her entire life specifically to avoid being in one. I understand that. I do not excuse it, but I understand it, and understanding it is its own kind of release. Not forgiveness exactly, more like setting down something heavy that you have been carrying so long you forgot it had weight. My mother called 3 more times in the weeks after the trip. Each call was slightly different from the ones before. The first was careful. She asked about work, she asked about my apartment. She did not mention Lisbon. The second was more honest. She said, out of nowhere, in the middle of a conversation about nothing, I think about the Outer Banks trip sometimes. I think about leaving you behind. She did not elaborate. She did not need to. The third call was the one that surprised me. She asked if she could come visit. Just her. Not a family event, not a holiday, not a structured occasion. Just Lorraine coming to Charleston to see where I live. I said yes. I did not say it immediately. I held the phone and I thought about it with the specific deliberateness of someone who has learned, slowly and at some cost, that yes is a door and you get to decide who you open it for. Then I said yes. She came on a Saturday in late October. I picked her up from the train station. She doesn't like to fly, a detail I have always found quietly funny given the life I have built around air freight. And we walked along the waterfront and I showed her my neighborhood. And we had lunch at a place I love, and she looked around my apartment with the eyes of a woman who spent 30 years running an interior design boutique. And she said, Whitney, this is beautiful. And I could tell she meant it, and I could tell she was also, underneath it, reckoning with something. You did all of this yourself, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. She nodded. She touched the ranunculus on the windowsill. A fresh bunch, same peach and rust, I replace them every week now, and she didn't say anything else for a moment, just stood there with her silver bob and her pearl earrings and her careful posture, touching the flowers. I'm proud of you, she said. I should have said that a long time ago. I did not cry. I want to tell you I cried because it would make a cleaner story, but I didn't. I felt the words land, and I felt the years they had been missing, and I held both things at the same time, and I said, "Thank you, Mom." And I meant it, and it was not everything, but it was something. And something, when you have learned to stop holding out for everything, is actually quite a lot. Before she left, I gave her a letter. I had written it the night before she arrived, not at the kitchen table. I wrote it sitting on the floor of my living room with my back against the couch, which is where I go when I am writing something that needs to come from the floor of me rather than the surface. I wrote it longhand on 2 pages of the yellow legal pad in the same handwriting I use for my logistics list, because I do not have a different handwriting for important things. My handwriting is my handwriting. The letter said, "I am not writing this to settle a score. I am writing it because I have decided to stop organizing myself around the hope that things will be different, without saying clearly what different would look like. So here is what different looks like. I am included when things are good, not only called when things go wrong. My life, the one I built alone, the one you are standing in right now, is treated as worth showing up for. I do not need to earn my place in this family through usefulness. I am in this family because I am in this family. That is enough. It has always been enough. I needed you to know that I know that now, even if it took you a while to catch up. I love you. That has never been in question. But love is not the same as availability, and I am done confusing the two." I handed it to her folded at the train station. She looked at it and then looked at me, and I said, "You can read it on the train." She nodded. She held it with both hands the way you hold something you understand is going to require something of you. Deja read it later that evening when I told her about it over the phone. I read it to her out loud, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "That's the most Whitney Caldwell thing I have ever heard, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment." I laughed. A real one, the kind that comes from somewhere uncomplicated. "You know what you did?" she said. "You stopped explaining yourself and started just being yourself. Those are different things." She was right. They are entirely different things, and the distance between them, the distance I traveled to get from one to the other, is what this whole story has been about. September came. I packed one bag, medium-sized, nothing I couldn't carry myself. I wore my grandmother's watch and my gold hoops and the ivory blouse tucked into the sage trousers because I dressed for myself, and that is what I wear when I am exactly where I am supposed to be. I took the window seat on the left side of the plane. The sunrise came up over the Atlantic at 6:14 in the morning, and it was, I don't have a grand word for it, I just don't. It was light on water. It was the world being enormous and indifferent and gorgeous all at once. I pressed my hand against the cold of the window, and I looked at it, and I thought about an 11-year-old girl pressing her hand against a different pane of glass, watching a car leave without her. I thought, look how far you went. I ate pastéis de nata at a cafe in the Alfama on my second morning. Alone at a small table by the window, a ceramic cup of coffee that was stronger than anything I make at home, the tarts golden and warm in a paper sleeve. I did not take a photograph for anyone. I just sat there and ate them and watched the light move across the old tiles on the building across the narrow street. That particular Lisbon light that I had processed paperwork about for 4 years without ever standing inside of. It was exactly as good as I knew it would be. My name is Whitney Caldwell. I am 34 years old, and I am the person who finally stopped waiting to be included and started showing up for herself. That is not a small thing. It took a long time to get there, and I would not trade a single step of it. Not even the hard ones, not even the parking garage, not even the 4 boarding passes on my mother's Instagram, because all of it led here, to a small table, to good coffee, to light on old tiles, to a hand no longer pressed against glass, just open, just warm, just mine. Before I go, I want to ask you something, and I mean this genuinely, so stay with me for one more moment. Has there ever been someone in your life who left you out when things were good, and only came looking for you when things fell apart? And what did you do with that? Did you answer? Did you walk away? Did you find some third thing, some quieter, more complicated choice that didn't fit neatly into either? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one, and I mean that. And I think this conversation is one worth having out loud. If this story stayed with you, if something in it felt familiar in a way you maybe weren't expecting, hit that like button. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because I have more stories and I'm not done telling them. And share this with someone who needs to hear that being the capable one is not the same as being the unimportant one. That being left behind does not mean you are not worth bringing. That the most powerful thing you can do, sometimes, is pick up the phone and decide, consciously, clearly, on your own terms, exactly what you are willing to give and to whom. Take care of yourself. I mean it. I'll see you in the next one.